The Pentagon just paid $35,000 to copy a drone the Iranians built for $20,000. That is the same Pentagon that runs a budget north of $1 trillion a year. And that is just the headline. Trump just extended his European tariff deadline for the second time, quietly admitting the bluff did not land. Russia and the United States are being publicly embarrassed by countries they used to dismiss. The Pentagon is releasing decades of secret files in what looks less like transparency and more like a cleanup before something bigger drops. And the United States Treasury just started revoking passports of Americans for unpaid family debts, the kind of move you used to read about in countries we lectured. But first, the story that lands directly on every taxpayer in this country, and stay until the end, because the last piece changes how you should think about the entire shape of American power right now. You know what the most expensive admission of failure looks like? It looks like the Pentagon, the same institution that has spent decades and trillions of dollars trying to dominate every battle space from the ocean floor to low orbit, walking into a press event this week and showing off a drone called Lucas, $35,000 per unit, reverse engineered from the Iranian Shahed 136. The same Shahed that costs Tehran roughly $20,000 to build. The same Shahed that the United States military spent the better part of 3 years calling a primitive piece of garbage. Now look, this is bigger than it looks because it is the first time since the early 80s that the American military-industrial complex has openly admitted it cannot out-engineer a country it considers a third-tier power. Not Russia, not China, Iran, a country under sanctions for over 4 decades, with a defense budget smaller than the one the Pentagon spends on coffee, fuel, and base groceries. What did that lead to? It led to American defense contractors, the household names, sitting on hangars full of unmanned systems that cost between $2 and $12 million apiece, while the side they are supposed to deter cranks out swarms for the price of a used pickup truck. And here is the part nobody is saying out loud. The Pentagon is not adopting Lucas because it is good. They are adopting it because the alternative was admitting in front of the Senate that the entire procurement model is broken. My read is that this ends one of 2 ways, and neither is good for the long-term position of the American defense industry. And speaking of institutions hiding the real numbers, if this analysis is landing for you, a subscription costs nothing and keeps this channel independent. Now, about the man in the Oval Office. Trump just extended his European tariff deadline for a second time, pushing it from early May out to the 4th of July. The official line is that he is giving Europe a chance to come to the table on a tariff-free deal for American goods. The unofficial reality? European negotiators stopped picking up the phone 3 weeks ago. Brussels figured out that the threat of tariffs only works if the threatening party is willing to absorb the consequences at home. And right now, the American consumer is already paying significantly more for groceries, fuel, and basic appliances. Honestly, this is the part that should worry every viewer. When a deadline gets extended once, that is a negotiating tactic. When it gets extended twice, with no progress in between, that is a country quietly admitting it has run out of leverage. The complication here is that the original tariff strategy was built on the assumption that European industry needed America more than America needed European industry. That assumption is now visibly cracking. German car makers are routing production through Mexico. French luxury houses are pivoting toward Asian buyers. And the Italians, who used to be the easiest target for American pressure, just signed a quiet supply deal with the Saudis. The revelation nobody wants to print is that Europe just discovered it has more options than it thought, and the United States just discovered it has fewer. Here is a question for you. What do you call a country that publishes 162 decades worth of classified documents on a single Friday? Because that is what the Defense Secretary did this week. Stacks of witness reports, photos, and incident summaries dating back to the 60s, including material from the Apollo program. So, The official framing is transparency, a government showing the public what it has been quietly cataloging for half a century. But watch what happens when you read between the lines. A document dump of this size on a quiet news Friday is not transparency. It is throat clearing. It is what an institution does right before it announces something it does not want overshadowed by a leak from inside its own walls. The complication? 3 of the witnesses cited in the documents are still alive, and 2 of them have already declined media requests this week. The third spent 20 minutes on a podcast and walked it back inside an hour. And here is what most analysts are not connecting. The same week, the Pentagon admitted it copied an Iranian drone. The defense secretary released decades of unexplained aerial phenomena files. 2 unrelated stories? Or 2 pieces of the same admission, that the institution is no longer in full control of its own narrative. Now, the story you have probably not heard yet because the cable networks are not covering it. The United States Treasury, working through the State Department, has begun automatically revoking American passports for citizens who owe more than $100,000 in unpaid family support obligations. No court hearing, no appeal window, just an automatic flag. And the next time you try to renew or use that passport at any port of entry, it is dead. Here is why this is bigger than a domestic enforcement story. The United States is the last major Western country to pioneer this kind of automatic travel document cancellation tied to private debt. Russia does it. Iran does it. A handful of Gulf states do it. And now America does it. The complication is that the threshold, $100,000, is not an unreachable number for a divorced father in California or New York. The Treasury estimates that nearly 200,000 Americans will fall into the bracket within the first 18 months of enforcement. That is a population the size of a mid-sized American city, suddenly unable to leave the country. The revelation here, and this is what most people are missing, is that this is not really about deadbeat parents. This is about creating an enforcement channel that can be expanded later. Once the legal and digital infrastructure exists to revoke a passport based on a Treasury database flag, the categories that can trigger that flag tend to grow over time. My read is that within 5 years, the unpaid debt threshold will drop and the categories will widen. And finally, the story that pulls all the others together. If you read the Russian and Chinese press this week, you find a pattern that the American press is not naming. 2 superpowers, the United States and Russia, are being publicly humiliated in real time by countries that not long ago we all considered second tier. Iran beat back a coordinated American and Israeli air campaign that was supposed to last 72 hours and end with regime change, and instead lasted 10 days and ended with a ceasefire on Tehran's terms. Ukraine, a country that 3 years ago could not pay its electric bills, is now fielding a military that has held off Russia's full ground force for years. What does that tell you? It tells you that the world's 2 old superpowers are simultaneously losing to opponents they spent decades dismissing. That has not happened since the late 1970s, when the British Empire and the French Empire collapsed inside a single decade. And the connecting thread of every story today is the same thread. 5 different events, 5 different domains, but underneath all of them is one mechanism: institutions that grew large enough to stop being accountable and are now discovering in real time what that costs. Thank you for staying to the end. If this analysis cut through the noise for you, like the video and subscribe, because the YouTube algorithm only shows independent reporting like this to viewers who actively engage. Likes and comments are the only signal that tells the platform real people are watching, and that is what keeps this channel out of the algorithmic shadow. If you can spare a super thanks, it goes straight into research time, document pulling, cross-checking 3 languages of source material, and the unglamorous hours of work that nobody else is doing on these stories. A channel sponsorship keeps this work independent of any political party, hedge fund, or media conglomerate, with no editorial strings attached at any level. Tell me in the comments which of these 5 stories hit you the hardest today, and where in the world you are watching from. I read every comment in the first 48 hours and reply personally to as many as I can. See you in the next one.